Welcome everyone. Here we are again with Frankly Speaking with Yael and Ajsa here, and we are here to remind you of what we were doing in 2020 when we started this adventure called Frankly Speaking with, and we were discussing different approaches and different issues and different ideas around youth participation in youth work. We were doing this because of great people that accepted our invitation and shared their expertise, and I will give you their names. They were Alex, Andreas, and Bastian. They were Christina, Dita, and Georgina, Ibrahim, Karina, Katarina, and Maria. And we are really bringing big thanks to all of them, because they actually made this series something that was really relevant to us, but we will discuss this a bit further. There is also one more person without whom this wouldn't work, and that's Marinela, who was editing our videos and making all those cute animations that made it all a bit more fun, even though we were discussing very serious things. In a retrospect, in trying to look at 2020 and these 10 videos, what have we learned?
Well, I took a little bit of time to, listen again and watch again, and I was once again so terribly impressed with what I heard during those 10 videos. And actually, there are about 9 or 10 things which I picked up on, which I think are just really important to highlight. Some of them are things which only one of our interviewees said. Things are things that several of them picked up on and run like a red thread through the entire discussions. So I think in the first place, one of the key learnings from the video series is that the structures and opportunity are not enough to ensure youth participation, and that so much more is needed, right, in order to support young people in their participation. Explicit invitations, co-creation, an inclusive culture, and building an inclusive culture very intentionally, and also agency for young people. And these are all needed as part of a youth policy in order to support youth participation. Another aspect which I think is really essential is that, especially among older professionals, of which by now I can consider myself one, but also several of our colleagues who spoke during the interview series also mentioned that they feel that they are now older professionals. No? They feel that it's very important for that category of people working in the sector to remind themselves constantly that young people's lives today are different. No? And they're different from our lives when we were young, and they're different from our lives as we are now. The culture, the concerns, the life worlds. And so we need to really make an effort to put ourselves in their shoes. And that's a job of intercultural learning. And that's something that youth work maybe at one stage, preached and tried to teach, but doesn't necessarily always apply to itself. Maybe a third learning from the series could be that both practice and research feel a little bit like the policy side of the triangle doesn't really take them enough into account. I have the impression that often policy feels a little bit neglected towards, when practitioners and researchers take the stage and do all these amazing things with young people and get all the credit for it. But nevertheless, there is still a certain lack of communication between the three different parts of the triangle. And for a youth policy to work, for participation to be supported, all three need to be really working together. I think a very strong point that came out of several of the interviews is that there is not always enough openness towards innovation or the need for innovation in the youth sector in Europe, and that in some respects the general culture in the field among donors, among practitioners, among organizations who are more established is that we do what we do and we do it well, and quality is really important, but maybe you know, the need to sort of reassess or rethink it isn't necessarily always very, very present. And at the same time, the field is also given a lot of credit by our interviewees, you know, for the fact that it has something really important to contribute from a political perspective, because it can help young people develop their political identity and their awareness and their political literacy, and as a result, their agency. But that this only really comes through participation and not so much by learning about participation. So there's also a practice conclusion there. I think it was interesting to hear from several of our speakers that the current structures and processes of formal participation, as much as they may be considered standard setters, you know, they may be considered as the kind of the gold standard, you know, they're not enough, right? And without the chance for young people to actually engage and develop with, you know, their own narratives, use those narratives in policy making and decision making, in determining the course of real policy making, actually that youth participation may end up, you know, how would I say, rather being tokenistic, and so there's really, you know, the need to develop this idea of feeding in from and taking from the informal, the results of informal participation, young people's ideas about so many issues that are developed in the informal or non-formal context, and that all of that is really also needed as a basis for effective participation policy. So I think, you know, underlying everything that was criticized or that was let's say given praise in the context of these interviews was the idea that actually young people are active and are responsible, and they do want to stand up for their values. They have values, right? They very often are very clear about what they are, right? And they don't necessarily know, how would I say, they don't necessarily do it in a way that the political establishment want or expect or are willing to allow, right? And that's a tension, and that's a cleavage that really needs to be worked on in order for meaningful participation, right? And in order for real inclusion to be achieved. And in the end, I think that the final conclusion, something that everyone in one way or another came to, was that, you know, it's permanent work, right? This is a permanent political work that youth participation, you know, it will never be achieved. It'll never be achieved to satisfaction. It'll never be achieved forever. So it's a matter of seeing it as something that, you know, needs constant work and constant attention.
It mattered to us for learning through shared experiences and expertise. It mattered to audiences who we managed to reach through some feedback that we were getting, in a sense that some things we were reminded of, some things we were kind of called to rethink and maybe reconnect with them in our practice or in our thinking, in our also conceptualizing the work in the youth field. But what it was maybe the most important thing, and why we were doing this, and why, let's say, it mattered to be done in 2020, is also to stop for a moment and stop for a second and kind of look at what are the things happening around us, and do we have responsibility to do something about that? We, in a sense of, you know, youth field, but also specifically in the sense of youth work and in the sense of youth policy and youth research. And then, you know, discussing topics that our interviewees were really kind of deeply engaged with and working on, either being it the racism or being it the gender inequality, some of the issues connected with migration and human rights, basically of young people, but also others, is something that really needs to kind of remind all of us why we are in this field and what we want to do. So I would say it matters in a sense of discussing, but also reflecting and I would always say doing, because young people participating is and participating, as you say, in this meaningful way is something that can make a difference. And that's why we still want to do something, no?
Yeah. So a very, very good and how would I say, an old colleague and a friend once said at a conference of youth workers, once said that you know, as an educator, your comfort zone will kill you. And it's absolutely one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I've used it again and again. Thank you so much, Alessio Surian. And I think that's in a sense sort of where we came from. It's also where we want to go in 2021. We'd like to continue to push the boundaries of our comfort zone or zones. We'd like to extend our thinking, use our imaginations. Ajsa mentioned that we've been on a bit of an adventure with this first series, and I think that the second series that we will propose from March until the end of this year, till the end of 2021, will be as much of an adventure as this one was, because our ambition would be to sort of play and you know, sort of get down and dirty with some of the ideas that are floating around in the sector and which never really get a chance to be aired, you know, other than at the big conferences. And we are lucky to be witnessing or experiencing a time of development in the youth sector, having had the European Youth Work Convention in December last year under the German presidency. There's a sense of, you know, the time has come for something to move, to change, to develop, and we want to be part of that. We want to offer some maybe not new thinking, but maybe different thinking, maybe thinking that, you know, was parked somewhere in you know, a cupboard and you know, needs dusting off and needs, you know, airing. So I think one of the things that we'd like to do in the coming series is to engage in conversations that matter and conversations that stretch our imaginations and stretch our thinking beyond maybe what we're used to. And for that, we'll be talking to a lot of very interesting people.
So stay tuned and see you around.